A gun was drawn long before anyone understood the truth. And by the time the truth arrived, an entire career was already burning down. That is how the fall of Officer Mark Ridley began. Not with a crime, not with a chase, but with a woman he never should have crossed. 1 hour earlier, a pair of red and blue lights flashed behind a silver Lexus cruising down a calm suburban street in Westford Hills, just outside Nashville. It was the kind of neighborhood where porch swings stayed still, where evening joggers moved quietly, and where trouble usually kept its distance. Inside the Lexus, Liana's heart slowed down and pulled to the curb with practiced calm. Her hands settled on the steering wheel, steady but tense. She knew this road. She had driven it for years. Her home sat only a few blocks away. Yet she also knew what this moment could turn into for someone like her. A black woman alone. A luxury car. A well-off neighborhood where some still whispered questions they thought no one heard. Liana took a slow breath and glanced into the rearview mirror. The officer had not stepped out yet. The empty moment between the stop and the approach tightened something in her chest. She reached for her phone, pressed record, and placed it on the seat beside her. She did not expect the footage to go viral. She did not even expect anyone else to see it. She simply understood the value of having her own version of events, unfiltered and complete. Behind her, the patrol car door finally opened. Officer Mark Ridley stepped onto the pavement, adjusting his belt with a slow, heavy motion. Mark was in his early 50s, a tall man with a rigid jaw, graying hair, and eyes that looked used to deciding things too quickly. He walked with the confidence of someone who had rarely been questioned. The kind of officer who believed experience made him untouchable. His hand hovered near his holster as he approached. Not fully drawn, but close enough to send a silent message. Liana breathed in through her nose, preparing herself. Here it begins. Ridley stopped just behind her window, forcing her to turn her head to see him. License and registration, he said. Flat, unbothered, commanding. Liana kept both hands visible. Can you tell me why I was stopped? She asked gently. Ridley narrowed his eyes. You failed to signal back there. Liana blinked once. She signaled. She knew she did, but she did not argue. My license and registration are in my bag, she said. I'm going to reach for them. He stared at her carefully. His gaze scanned her suit, her wristwatch, her manicured nails. There was something cold behind his eyes. Not curiosity. Something else. Something darker. Go ahead, he said. Slowly, Liana moved with deliberate clarity. She handed him the documents. Mark took them without thanks, without a glance at them. Instead, he continued to stare at her, studying, waiting. The silence stretched. Then he finally looked at her license. His expression flickered for a split second, then hardened again. You live around here? He asked. Yes, she replied. Right down the street. He clicked his tongue. Is that so? What brings you this way? Liana gave a soft breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite frustration. I didn't know I needed a reason to drive home. His smirk faded. Ma'am, he said, I'm just doing my job. No, she replied quietly. You're not. The words hit the air like a spark. Ridley straightened. His posture shifted from casual authority to something rigid and irritated. His fingers twitched near his holster again. Just a millimeter. Just enough to send a message. Liana felt the warning in his body language even before his tone changed. I'd watch that attitude, he said. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Her heartbeat quickened, but she kept her face composed. How exactly am I making this harder? She asked softly. Ridley said nothing. He turned and walked back to his cruiser, her license still in hand. Liana pressed her palms against the steering wheel to steady herself. She had seen this dynamic before. A man who wanted control. A badge used as a threat. A silence meant to intimidate. But she was not the same woman she had once been. She had grown past letting fear guide her. She looked at her phone, recording on the seat. Something told her she would need every second of it. Inside his patrol car, Officer Mark Ridley stared at her license for a long moment. The name meant nothing to him, but the address did. A quiet irritation stirred in him. She had not shown fear. Most people did, especially alone at night, especially during a traffic stop. They stumbled. They fumbled. They apologized even when they had done nothing wrong. But not her. She looked too calm, too steady, too sure of herself. That confidence irritated him in a way he could not explain. Or maybe he simply chose not to. He typed her name into the system. Liana Hart. Married. Clean record. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that justified pushing further. Yet he wanted to push anyway. His instincts, as he liked to call them, whispered that something was off. In truth, it was not instinct. It was pride. And pride often disguised itself as authority. His radio crackled. Unit 17, status check. Ridley lifted the receiver. Routine stop. No backup needed. He set it down and kept staring at the Lexus. He could make this simple. He could issue a warning, hand back her documents, and move on. But she had not shown fear, and that alone felt like a challenge. He opened his door and walked back to her car. This time slower, more deliberate, more determined. Liana turned toward him as he stopped by her window again. Her expression still steady, still unreadable. "Everything all right, officer?" she asked. Ridley leaned in slightly. "You got somewhere to be," he said. His tone was casual, but his eyes held something darker. "Yes," she replied. "Home." He held her gaze, letting the silence sit heavily between them. Then he gave a small smirk. "Funny, you don't look like someone who lives around here." Liana felt the meaning behind those words. The sharpness disguised as a remark. The prejudice hiding behind a smile. She inhaled slowly. "And you don't look like an officer who follows protocol." His smirk cracked, just for a moment, but it was enough. He tapped the roof of her car with his fingers, irritation simmering under his calm exterior. Liana sensed the shift. His pride was wounded, and wounded pride often reacted in dangerous ways. "Am I free to go?" she asked. "What's the rush?" Ridley said. "I have nothing more to add," she answered. "Either issue a ticket or let me go." He did not move. He simply stared, a silent battle of wills. Then, without warning, he reached for her door handle. Liana locked the door a moment before he could pull it. Her heart lurched, but her face remained still. Ridley's expression sharpened. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "On what grounds?" she asked. His hand drifted toward his hip again. "Don't need to spell that out." She knew what he was doing. She knew exactly how quickly this could shift from control to danger. She also knew something else. He had no idea who she was. Liana lifted her phone slowly, never breaking eye contact. "I'm recording this," she said. Ridley gave a dry laugh. "You think I care about that? You know how many times people say that?" His fingers twitched toward his holster again. In a neighborhood this quiet, it was impossible not to draw attention. Across the street, a man folded his arms and stared. A woman walking her dog stopped mid-step. A teenage boy pulled out his phone. More eyes, more witnesses. If Officer Mark Ridley won an audience, he had one. "Badge number," Liana said loudly. Ridley's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "I said step out of the car," he repeated. "Are you refusing to comply?" he added, projecting his voice for the crowd. "I'll step out," Liana said calmly. "When you call your superior, and tell them you just stopped the wife of the Deputy Director of Homeland Security." The moment froze. Ridley's expression collapsed. Someone across the street whispered, "Deputy Director." The line had shifted. For the first time that night, Officer Mark Ridley realized he had crossed a boundary he would not be able to return from. And the consequences were coming faster than he could prepare for. Ridley hesitated for the first time that night. It was small, barely a pause, but Liana saw it. The bystanders saw it, and that single breath of uncertainty cracked the wall he had built around himself. His fingers twitched near his holster again, a reflex he could not control. Not because he needed it, but because he suddenly felt exposed. Vulnerable. Seen. Liana kept her phone steady. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, but her voice stayed calm. "I asked for your superior." Ridley's eyes darted across the growing crowd. Phones were recording. Neighbors were murmuring. A few had stepped closer, drawn by the unmistakable tension thickening in the air. His authority had always gone unchallenged. But now every stare felt like judgment. Every whisper felt like accusation. "You're refusing to comply," he said, louder this time. His voice wavered. "Just enough." "I'm refusing to be intimidated," Liana answered. That answer struck harder than anything else she had said. Ridley's jaw clenched. He squared his shoulders, a man doubling down on a mistake instead of correcting it. "Last chance," he said. "Open the door." Liana didn't move. Her phone remained lifted, the recording unmistakable. The street had changed. A quiet road had become a pressure cooker. An older man stepped closer from his porch, muttering, "Why'd he reach for the door?" A woman added, "She didn't do anything." Voices rose. Eyes narrowed. Phone stayed pointed. Ridley heard every word, and the anger in him twisted into something more dangerous. Not just frustration, panic. His hand dropped to his holster again, and this time he pulled the gun. The sound of the weapon clearing leather cut through the air like a blade. Several people gasped. One shouted, "What is he doing?" But Liana did not flinch. She felt fear claw at her ribs, but she kept her gaze locked on him. "You just made a mistake you can't talk your way out of," she said quietly. Ridley's breathing was uneven. He had crossed a line he could not undo. But backing down felt like defeat, and defeat was something he had never learned to process. Then new footsteps hit the pavement. Fast, firm, authoritative. "Officer Ridley, stand down." Ridley froze. He turned his head just enough to see the figure approaching. Sergeant Daniel Price, his superior, and a man whose patience ran thin even on good days. Price's face was tight with fury. "Lower the weapon." Ridley's grip tightened for a moment, as if he had to fight his own instinct. His pride battled with reality. The crowd waited. Phone stayed locked on him. Price stepped closer, his voice harder. "Now." Ridley finally lowered the gun, though his hand shook. He didn't holster it. "Holster your weapon," Price demanded. Ridley hesitated, then shoved it back into place with trembling fingers. Liana exhaled quietly. She hadn't realized she had been holding her breath. Price turned to her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She did not look away from Ridley when she answered. "I want my license and registration returned to me." Ridley didn't move. Price took a step toward him. "Hand them over." With shaking hands, Ridley pulled the documents from his pocket and tossed them toward her dashboard. The gesture was rough, disrespectful, and filled with the bitter taste of humiliation. Liana picked them up without comment. Price faced her again. "Would you like to file a formal complaint?" Liana did not hesitate this time. She thought of every woman who never got the chance to speak. Every person whose voice was cut short before it was heard. Every name that had become a headline after a tragedy. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I want him held accountable." Price nodded once. Understood. More people gathered. Not cheering. Not celebrating. Just watching the unraveling of a man who thought his badge made him invincible. Price pressed his radio. "Internal Affairs, respond. Officer Mark Ridley is being placed on administrative leave effective immediately." Ridley's shoulders tensed. The call was the beginning of the end. A voice crackled through the radio. "Copy that." Price turned back to Ridley with a cold stare. "Badge and gun. Now." Ridley's eyes widened. "Wait. Now." Price repeated. Ridley knew he could not disobey. Not with cameras rolling. Not with his superior standing over him. His fingers trembled as he unpinned his badge. For 28 years, that badge had been his identity. His shield. His justification. His pride. Now it felt heavier than ever. He placed it in Price's open hand. Next came his gun. He removed it slowly, shame flushing his face as he handed it over. "You're relieved of duty pending investigation," Price said. "Leave the area immediately." Ridley's jaw tightened. Rage simmered beneath humiliation. But he turned and walked toward his car without a word. The crowd parted for him. No one cheered. No one clapped. They simply watched the silent fall of a man who believed power gave him the right to do anything. And Liana watched too. Not with triumph. Not with satisfaction. But with a quiet understanding of how close the night had come to tragedy. She held her phone, recording still running. A record of everything that had happened. A record she knew might be needed soon. Because this story was not ending here. It had only just begun. And when Ridley reached his car and opened the door, another shock waited for him. One he could never have prepared for. Ridley gripped the door of his patrol car, ready to slam it shut and disappear before anyone said another word. But as he lowered himself inside, parked in the glow of streetlights and surrounded by witnesses, a new voice cut through the air. "You're not going anywhere until you hear this." Everyone turned. Liana had stepped away from her car. Not in fear, in resolve. Ridley froze halfway into his seat. His face tightened as if he already sensed the blow that was coming, but couldn't stop it. Liana stood a few feet from him, her phone still in hand, the recording still running. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority in her tone was quiet and devastating. "My name is Liana Hart," she said. Ridley blinked. He had heard the name moments earlier, but now he was forced to truly see it. "And I'm the wife of Marcus Hart," she continued, "Deputy Director of Homeland Security." The words dropped like stone into a silent lake. No one spoke. Phones captured everything. Ridley's mouth parted, but no sound came out. One of the neighbors whispered, "Deputy Director." Another murmured, "He really messed up now." Price's expression hardened even further. He hadn't known her identity either, and the weight of what Ridley had done hit him all at once. He looked at Ridley like he had just realized the scope of destruction his officer had unleashed. Liana stepped closer. "You pulled a gun on me," she said. "No threat, no crime, no reason." Ridley swallowed hard. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words tangled before they could form. The damage was complete, irreversible, open for the world to see. Liana ended the recording. The soft click of her thumb hitting the screen seemed louder than gunfire. Ridley stared at her in disbelief. His entire life, his entire career, 28 years of training, authority, and pride, crumbling in front of people he used to intimidate with a glance. Price stepped forward. "Officer Ridley, leave. Now." Ridley turned away, humiliated. He shut his door too hard. The patrol car jerked to life. He pulled away from the curb with a violent swerve. But he did not get far. Barely 3 intersections away, he pulled into an empty parking lot and parked under a flickering lamp. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He felt anger, confusion, disbelief, fear, all fighting each other inside him. It wasn't supposed to go like this. He always had control. He always had the last word. He had never worried about consequences. But tonight, everything he thought he had mastered was breaking apart. Back on the street, neighbors slowly drifted home. The tension settled, leaving only whispers and shaken breaths. Liana stepped back in her car, hands trembling now that danger had passed. Her strength had carried her through the moment, but the fear she held at bay finally pushed through the cracks. Just as she placed her phone on the console, it buzzed. She didn't even need to look to know who it was. She answered. "Liana," Marcus said. Even one word carried a heavy edge. He hadn't raised his voice, but she could hear the steel under it. "I'm okay," she told him. Silence followed. A silence filled with anger that wasn't aimed at her, but at what could have happened. "What is his name?" Marcus finally asked. Liana hesitated for a moment. "Mark Ridley." Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that meant someone's life was about to get complicated. Very complicated. "I'll take care of it," he said. She knew he would. Marcus Hart was not a man who idly watched his wife be threatened. He was a man with access, authority, and the kind of influence that moved mountains without leaving fingerprints. When she hung up, her phone lit up with notifications. People had already uploaded the footage. Comments and reposts multiplied by the second. By the time Liana reached her driveway, the video had crossed 30,000 views. By the time she stepped inside her home, it hit 200,000. And by midnight, news outlets were calling her phone nonstop. But while the world reacted, Officer Mark Ridley sat alone in the darkness of his car, staring at his hands. Every part of him shook. He had defended his actions for years, believing he was firm, not cruel. Strict, not biased. Experienced, not reckless. But tonight stripped away the excuses he had told himself for decades. In his mind, he replayed the moment his hand touched his gun. The look in Liana's eyes. The crowd forming. The sudden realization of who she was. He had made mistakes before, but never one this catastrophic. And then his phone rang. The caller ID made his stomach twist. Internal affairs. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire world was snapping in two, and he knew that no explanation, No apology, no defensive justification would save him from what came next. Meanwhile, Liana sat at the edge of her bed, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. Her mind replayed the moment the gun was drawn. Her breath caught every time she thought about it. She had survived, but she knew the outcome could have been different. Too different. She looked at the flood of messages on her phone. Some encouraging, some furious on her behalf. Others sharing stories of their own close calls. For the first time that night, she allowed her shoulders to drop, allowed her breath to deepen, allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had held together. Because the truth was clear. Her life nearly changed forever. And for many others, it actually had. But this time, the story wouldn't end in silence. This time, someone who had crossed the line would face the full consequences. And by sunrise, Mark Ridley's nightmare would go far beyond job loss. A storm was coming for him, and he had no idea how big it was. By dawn, the video had already traveled farther than Ridley ever imagined. Millions of eyes had seen the moment he drew his gun on a woman who never once raised her voice at him. Clips spread across every platform. Anger grew in real time. But Ridley didn't sleep. He sat in his dim kitchen, staring at the badge he no longer had and the empty space on his belt where his gun used to rest. He replayed the night over and over, trying to twist the story in his mind into something that justified his actions. Yet every time he reached the part where fear overtook him, he felt a cold truth crawl through his chest. He had crossed a line he couldn't recross, and the world had watched. A hard knock at the door jolted him upright. Two men stood on his porch, both in suits, both carrying folders, both wearing expressions that left no room for hope. "Mark Ridley," the first one said. Ridley nodded, throat tight. "We're with internal affairs. You need to come with us." He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell them what he had been telling himself since the moment the gun came out. But no words came, only the hollow sound of defeat settling into his bones. He followed them out, knowing this was only the beginning. Across town, Liana sat at her kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her. Her phone vibrated constantly. Reporters, friends, co-workers, people she had never met. The attention was overwhelming, but she ignored most of it. Then another call came in. She answered without hesitation. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. "Tired," she said honestly. "I'm heading home," he told her. "I already spoke with the department, and federal oversight is stepping in." She closed her eyes. She knew what that meant. Mark Ridley wasn't just losing his job. His entire career was under investigation, now at a level he could not outrun or outtalk. When she ended the call, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had held herself together through fear, anger, humiliation, and public exposure. But beneath all of that was a quieter truth. She had survived something that had destroyed countless lives before hers. She felt both gratitude and sorrow for that. Later that morning, Sergeant Price arrived at the station to face the inevitable fallout. He had barely stepped inside before a dozen eyes turned to him, some filled with worry, some with judgment, some with fear of what this incident might drag into the light. He didn't speak to anyone. He went straight to the chief's office. The chief looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "Price," he said, "close the door." When the door clicked shut, a heavy silence filled the room. "That video has put this department under a microscope," the chief said. "The calls I'm getting, this isn't going away." Price didn't respond. He knew. He had seen the comments. He had read the messages. The world wasn't just angry. The world was demanding accountability. "Tell me exactly what happened," the chief said. And Price did. He told him every detail, every warning sign, every moment Ridley could have stopped, every chance he was given to de-escalate, but refused. By the end, the chief leaned back and rubbed a hand over his face. "We're suspending him without pay pending termination. And federal investigators want the full case file on him. All years of service." Price felt the weight of those words. Ridley didn't just lose his job. The government wanted a closer look at his past, at his pattern of stops, at every complaint ever made against him. This was bigger than one night. It was a full audit of a man who had thrived on unchecked power for decades. That afternoon, Ridley sat in an interrogation room. It was smaller than he remembered, colder, quieter. A folder was placed on the table in front of him. "Officer Ridley," the investigator said, "we're opening an inquiry into your history of stops and use of force incidents." Ridley blinked in confusion. "My history? This was one incident. This was the one caught on camera," the investigator interrupted. "We're looking into all the ones that weren't." Ridley felt the air leave his lungs. He hadn't expected this. He thought he would face punishment for one night, not his entire past. He watched as the investigator opened the file and slid several documents toward him. There were names he recognized, stops he barely remembered, incidents he thought were forgotten. But they weren't forgotten. They were waiting for this moment. "Someone is reviewing everything," the investigator said. "Internal, federal, external." "Who?" Ridley asked, his voice hollow. "Deputy Director Marcus Hart," the investigator replied. Hearing that name made his pulse pound. He knew now there was no escape. Not from this. Not from the consequences he had invited onto himself. Meanwhile, Liana stepped outside for a walk to clear her mind. The breeze carried a strange mix of calm and heaviness. Some neighbors waved at her. Some approached her with apologies. Others said nothing, but watched with quiet respect. A young girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Is that the lady from the video?" Liana heard it. She swallowed. She kept walking. She never asked for attention. She only asked for respect. And she asked for safety. Something she had to earn in moments when she should have been protected without question. When she reached the end of her street, her phone vibrated again. A new message. A link. A headline. "Officer Mark Ridley under federal review after drawing weapon on unarmed woman." Her name wasn't in the headline. Just unarmed woman. She stood still for a moment, staring at the words. Not out of fear, not out of shock, but out of the strange reality that this headline, this moment, this uproar was not new. This was a cycle the world had seen again and again. She wouldn't let this one fade into another forgotten story, especially because this time, the right person was finally facing the consequences he had tried to avoid his entire life. Back inside her home, Liana sat quietly, listening to the faint buzz of notifications and the echo of what almost happened. Tonight had shown her the danger of silence. So she refused to be silent now. And far from her quiet street, in a government building with marble floors and guarded hallways, Marcus Hart closed a report with Ridley's name at the top. He was calm, controlled, focused. He was also ready, because what came next would determine whether a man like Ridley walked away with excuses or faced a reckoning he could no longer outrun. And Marcus did not intend to let him walk away. Marcus Hart stepped into a conference room filled with officials who already looked tense. Papers covered the table. Screens displayed timelines from the night before. Every pair of eyes shifted toward him as he entered, because everyone here understood something very clearly. This was no longer a local police incident. This was now a federal matter. One of the analysts cleared her throat. "Deputy Director, we've reviewed the footage from every angle." The officer escalated without provocation. Marcus nodded. He already knew. He had watched the footage repeatedly in the early hours of the morning, each time feeling the same heavy twist inside his chest. The fear in Liana's eyes when the gun was drawn was something he would never forget. "Proceed," he said. Another agent slid a file toward him. "Ridley has a documented pattern. Unjustified stops. Frequent complaints. Several internal notes marked unprofessional conduct. Nothing was ever taken seriously because he always stopped short of crossing the line." Marcus opened the file. Page after page. Complaint after complaint. Stories from people who hadn't had the power, the evidence, or the platform to challenge him. And now he crossed it, Marcus said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone felt the weight of his words. He crossed it with the wrong person, an agent added. Marcus closed the file and stood. "We proceed with full review. His actions from last night will not be treated as an isolated event. We dig through every year of his service." He paused. "And we ensure no one else like him stays in uniform." No one questioned him. No one hesitated. Orders like this were rare. But when they came with purpose. By afternoon, the the story had hit national headlines. Not local, not regional, national. Every news anchor repeated it with the same sharp urgency. An officer drawing a gun on an unarmed black woman. A woman who had done nothing wrong. A woman who was connected to the second most powerful figure in Homeland Security. Ridley's face appeared on screens across the country. Clips of the video were played in debates, interviews, and reports. Experts weighed in. Some condemned him instantly. Some questioned how long his behavior had gone unchecked. Others demanded investigations into the entire department. His name was everywhere, and every headline cut deeper than the last. Ridley, meanwhile, sat in a small, dim room waiting for the next round of questioning. His hands shook uncontrollably. He stared at his reflection in the dark window, a man who no longer recognized himself. The door opened. Sergeant Price stepped in. His face was heavy with fatigue. Disappointment replaced the anger from the night before. Ridley looked at him, his voice hoarse. "Dan, you know me. You know I'm not like what they're saying." Price closed the door, leaned against the wall, and let out a slow breath. "I knew you once," he said. "But last night, I didn't recognize the man I saw." "That woman," Ridley began. "Stop," Price said sharply. "That woman did nothing wrong. And you know it." Ridley pressed his palms against his eyes. "It got out of control. She pushed me. She was too calm. It felt suspicious." "Calm is not a crime," Price said. He pushed off the wall and stepped toward him. "And suspicion is not an excuse to put a gun in someone's face." Ridley's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to go that far." "But you did," Price said. "And now you're facing the consequences." Ridley stared at him, the final thread of denial snapping. Back at home, Liana sat on her couch as messages poured in from around the country. People thanked her for standing her ground. Others shared their own encounters. Many said the same thing in different words. "You did what we couldn't. You survived what we didn't. You spoke up for all of us. You reminded us that silence can't protect us." Liana read each message with a heavy heart. She responded to none of them, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. Every story felt like a weight she had unknowingly picked up when the recording began. Her doorbell rang. She opened it to find Marcus standing there. His suit jacket was off, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted, but his eyes softened when he saw her. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside and pulled her into a quiet embrace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he pulled back. "He'll be facing federal charges," Marcus said. "And he won't be an officer again." Liana felt the truth settle, not as victory, but as justice, a justice too many never received. Later that evening, the final blow landed. The department held a press conference. The chief stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but grim. "Officer Mark Ridley has been terminated effective immediately. Our department is cooperating fully with federal investigators. We will be reviewing every aspect of our training and conduct policies." Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The world waited for what would happen next. But for Ridley, it was over long before the press conference began. He sat in the back of an unmarked vehicle, wrists tense, while two federal agents finalized the paperwork that would begin his arrest process. He stared out the window, unable to understand how quickly power had vanished from his hands. It ended not with a gunshot. Not with a chase, but with the truth catching up to him. Truth recorded by a woman he thought he could intimidate. Truth backed by witnesses who refused to look away. Truth supported by a husband who held more authority than Ridley could ever imagine. And truth that echoed across the country, reminding millions that accountability was not a dream. Not when people dared to speak, dared to record, dared to demand it. That night, Liana sat in bed, scrolling through messages she still hadn't answered. For the first time since everything began, she let her shoulders relax. She let herself breathe without fear. She let her heart slow down. Because this time, the right person lost.